Good evening, everyone. My name is Russ Eshelman, and on behalf of the Journalism Department, I'd like to welcome you to this evening's presentation. Our speaker is Gene Foreman. Those of you who are students in Com 409 will recognize Gene Foreman. He's the author of your textbook, The Ethical Journalist, Making Responsible Decisions in the Pursuit of News. Many of you also may recognize the name Gene Foreman as the first Larry and Ellen Foster Professor of Journalism here at Penn State, and Gene is still instrumental in putting on our Foster Foreman Conference each semester. Gene retired from the daily newspaper business after 41 years in 1998. The last quarter century, he was with the Philadelphia Inquirer and in several top editing positions, including managing editor. Gene, though he has retired from daily journalism, he really hasn't retired. He spends several weeks each semester working with Penn State students, editing long-form stories, and in conversations with professors and administrators in our Department of Journalism, answering questions and providing a variety of services for us. Gene is one of the country's leading experts on journalism ethics. In fact, this semester he's a visiting distinguished professor of journalism ethics at the University of Arkansas, where among his duties he's helping develop the university's first Center for Ethics in Journalism. Tonight, Gene is going to speak on journalism ethics in the digital age. Following his presentation, he will be joined on the stage here by John Dillon, the Eberly Professor of Practice in Journalism, and they will conduct a discussion about what Gene has talked about this evening. We'd also like you to get involved, so please begin thinking of questions you might like to ask Gene and John when they're down here. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be back at Penn State. And tonight I want to share with you some thoughts about the state of journalism ethics. We're living and working in a time of turbulent transition in our profession, and also with news consumers, as those consumers continue to move toward digital delivery of the news. If you look at journalism, though, in the long term, and as say dating back to when I entered the profession, which is more than a half century ago, then we've made remarkable progress. But in the short term, since the advent of digital journalism, there are some disturbing trends. In the long term, we knew when I got into the journalism that we were joining a noble profession, and that our job was to find the truth and report it to the public and to serve the public. But beyond that, the goals of our profession were not well defined at all. But in the decade between the mid-70s and the mid-80s, there was in our profession an ethical awakening that the rank and file, as long as the newsroom leaders were part of a new, more idealistic generation. And they insisted on more specific rules of ethical conduct and also higher rules. The emphasis on ethics led in 1996 to, let's see if we can get this, journalists wanted more stringent standards, and the SVJ Code of 1996 was a culmination of this new emphasis on ethics in our profession. The Society of Professional Journalists Code has become a model for our newsrooms. It is a voluntary code, of course, and the code's essence is stated in 4 cornerstone principles. The first one is on the screen: to seek truth and report it. That remains our mission, a succinct statement of our mission. Second is minimize harm, and that deals with recognizing the truth can hurt. Then we have to consider whether omitting certain details or even an entire story, if the harm done by that outweighs the value of the information to the public. The third is act independently. That we must keep our distance from those we cover and never be in their debt. we work for the public. And finally, be accountable, that we have an obligation to the public to talk with them, to explain our decisions, and correct our errors. Now to look at journalism in the short term. It's worth noting that while digital journalism is rapidly becoming the dominant news medium, it's been around only since the mid-1990s. Of course, you students have actually literally grown up with digital journalism, along with texting and tweeting and Facebook friending. But consider the phenomenon in the 400-year history of journalism, and it's a mere blink of the eye. In an environment in which so much has changed in the way that we gather the news and the way we deliver the news, some journalists are taking the position that the principles of our profession are outmoded. They want to throw these principles out simply because there is a revolution in technology, and that requires, in their view, a revolution in journalism ethics. I would disagree about that I think it's precisely in a period of transition in technology that we should adhere to time-honored principles. I think that ethical standards can't be tailored to a specific method of delivering the news. And doing the right thing can't be based on how the news is delivered. I do acknowledge that standards do change over time, and that this should evolve from trial and error experience and is from thoughtful collaboration. As a result of that deliberative process, the standards of conduct for journalism is much more sophisticated than it was when I entered the profession. And so, of course, this evolution in journalism standards should continue. There are, for example, some stimulating ideas in a new book out written by Tom Rosenstiel and Kelly McBride. Among other things, they called for journalists to be more transparent. We need to be more transparent with the audience about how we got the information that we're giving them, and we should also acknowledge when there are gaps in the information that we haven't been able to close up at this point. But in contrast to the proposals of Rosenstiel and McBride, there is a shift in journalist behavior that doesn't, in my opinion, pass the test of logic. One example of this trend is the troubling presence of journalists' opinions on the web. These opinions often show up in blogs or in the social media, such as Facebook or Twitter. We in the news media are constantly being criticized for any bias that the public perceives in the way we report. And this is especially true when we're reporting on politics. Naturally, journalists have opinions, but when we report and when we talk about things like that, we keep those opinions to ourselves. We do not talk in public about it. So remember, it's not that we're contending that journalists don't have opinions. Obviously they do. The question is, what do they do with those opinions? When they report, it is a mark of their professionalism that they filter those opinions out of their stories. It's also important that they refrain from talking about the events and issues and people that they cover. And this principle doesn't change merely because professional journalists happen to share cyberspace with the citizen bloggers. Most of these bloggers produce a lot of opinions, but very, very little original reporting. When journalists are assigned by their news editors to write blogs, they're typically urged to adopt a, quote, voice. And that voice should be more relaxed, the theory goes, than what is found in a traditional news reporting. And so from here, it's a short leap to matching the opining of our amateur blogger brethren. Let's say that you are covering the mayor. and you scrupulously keep fair and accurate and straight in your news columns or your newscasts. But then you write on your blog that the mayor's a jerk. All right, your credibility with the public is going to be undermined because your readers no longer see you as a neutral observer. And in addition, the mayor is unlikely to give you even the time of day now that he or she knows how you feel about the mayor. So it's tempting to say what you think about a controversy, but you have to remember that the internet is about as public as you can get. In the recent spate of news about same-sex marriage, a number of journalists who are still working in the profession were among the Facebook users who changed their profile pictures to the equal symbol. They wanted to signify their solidarity for equal rights with their gay and lesbian friends. They have to understand, though, that right or wrong, a lot of people who read the news don't feel that way. On the internet, the citizen bloggers take pride in disclosing how they stand on all the issues. They challenge journalists to make a similar disclosure. And I think some journalists are swayed by that argument. They say we can build credibility if we disclose our opinion. And I say that's counterintuitive, and that's based on 40 years of listening to newspaper readers complain about perceived bias in the news. Disclosure ignores the reality that citizen bloggers are all about expressing opinion, while we journalists, those of us who cover the news rather than write columns or editorials, are all about seeking and delivering the truth. Now, to illustrate the point, I want to cite the example of a newspaper that we're familiar with and one that I admire. And that is the Harrisburg Patriot News in Harrisburg. Just before last November's presidential election, in a campaign that he covered, the paper's politics writer wrote a column announcing that he was voting for Mitt Romney in the election. Afterward, in a chat with readers, the writer said, quote, "The wall between opinion and hard news was blown open long before my piece today." And he also said, quote, "The landscape has changed and traditional journalistic institutions must change with it." Later, his editors told the Poynter Institute, quote, "We demand transparency in how public officials handle their duties and how they do their job and spend taxpayers' money." And I like the idea of reflecting that same kind of transparency in our publication. Now, the Patriot News, as I said, is a paper I admire, and I think that the writer and editor were accountable when they explained to their audience why they had done what they did. But with due respect, I submit that they failed to make their case. Let's look at the writer. He did not explain how the changed landscape requires journalistic institutions to change, nor does it logically follow that because others are blowing open the wall between opinion and reporting, that makes it right. In response to his editor, who spoke of transparency, I say that the roles of office holders and reporters are different. Office holders are players in civic life. Reporters are observers, and they are observers on behalf of their fellow citizens. The opinions of office holders are important to us as taxpayers when they pertain to how they will carry out the duties that we're elected to. But the reporters, all they are expected to do is get it right and be fair. Their opinions, if they do it right, don't matter at all. I've been talking about journalists who are dedicated to reporting from a neutral point of view, but who then damage their credibility in one way or another by revealing publicly their opinions. There is a body of thought in journalism today that, in my judgment, poses an even greater threat to credibility. and that is the notion that journalists don't have to be neutral at all in their reporting, that they should freely express their opinions in the news columns. There's currently a very enlightening article on the internet, an exchange between two articulate intellectuals about the proper role of journalists. And Bill Keller is one of them. He's the former executive editor of the New York Times and currently a columnist for that paper. The other is Glenn Greenwald, who has been in the news as a conduit for the revelations of Edward Snowden about spying by the American government. In lieu of his column in this past Sunday's issue of the New York Times, Bill Keller ran a verbatim transcript of the emails he traded with Greenwald. The article is headlined, as you see here, "The Future of News. Is Glenn Greenwald the future of news?" And I commend to you to read the piece, which is available online. You can Google Keller and Greenwald in the New York Times Future of News, and you can see that. But I wanted to give you just a glimpse at the arguments. First, Bill Keller, and he said, quote, "I believe that impartiality is a worthwhile aspiration in journalism, even if it is not perfectly achieved. I believe that in most cases it gets you closer to the truth because it imposes a discipline of testing all assumptions, including, importantly, the reporter's own assumptions." And then from Greenwald, quote, "A journalist who is petrified of appearing to express any opinions will often steer clear of declarative sentences about what is true, opting instead for a cowardly and unhelpful, quote, 'Here's what both sides say and I will not resolve the conflict.' That rewards dishonesty on the part of political and corporate officials who know they can rely on a, quote, 'objective reporter' to amplify their falsehoods without challenge." So the issues are drawn. Keller versus Greenwald lay out, both of them very intelligent, articulate people, what this debate over the future of journalism should be. Now, I'm on Keller's side in this argument, of course, but Greenwald does make valid criticisms. I agree with Greenwald that reporters can and should search for the truth, which is not necessarily halfway between a claim made by this side and a claim made by the other side. But unlike Greenwald, I think that we can do this without turning news stories into polemics. Now, I'd like to turn to another issue involving digital journalism, and that is that in discussing this, I want to make clear that the digital platform has tremendous potential that we want to exploit. It offers tremendous opportunity for journalism, and the digital devices enhance our reporting, and it enables us to deliver the news to our consumers with the speed of light. And we can deliver the news in multimedia. The new journalism is different platforms and how to report on them is taught at Penn State, that we are seeing marvelous examples of storytelling that cannot be duplicated in print alone or in broadcast alone. And it certainly has the speed that print certainly lacks. So we think that there is tremendous potential. The question is, can we harness that potential? And here, economic factors enter the picture. Will we be able to take full advantage of digital journalism? Our most significant ethical challenges today relating to digital journalism deal with the key question, and that is, how do we pay for news on the web? It is fundamentally an ethical issue because news organizations have a moral obligation. Their social responsibility is to give their communities reliable information so that the citizens can make governing decisions. And that kind of journalism costs a lot of money. Although news consumers are moving to the web, advertising is not followed in volume sufficient to underwrite journalism on its own. Even though newspaper staffs have been emaciated in the last few years, newspapers in the AP, which is owned by the newspapers, contribute the bulk of the content that appear on websites today. If newspapers disappear, the question is, where will that content come from? And so news media executives are searching, and sometimes in desperation, for a way to finance journalism on web only. And sometimes those ideas are harmful rather than helpful. Some of them would diminish journalism rather than nourish it. And I think that's ironic because the web is brimming with dubious information, that news consumers are hungry for news that they can trust. We in the news media, traditionally with our established news organizations, have a track record. We have a reputation that should serve us well in the competitive environment. But some of these ideas, which I'm going to get into, deal with ideas that would dilute our effectiveness, would dilute the value of our brands. And one of them I have on the screen is embedded ads in the news. This is one example of ill-conceived marketing ideas that raises a little money but exacts a heavy toll on credibility. When you read a news story on some websites, you see two words with two green underscores. And if you hover over that with your cursor, you get an ad. And the ad messages get in the way of reading the story. So in the first place, the readers are distracted. In the second place, we invite them to make a question, is why are those words chosen by the reporter? Are they chosen because that will generate money because of the ad? That's a cost that we really don't need. But there is a new and more dangerous threat, and that is native advertising. This is advertising cleverly disguised as news stories. You see it on websites typically labeled sponsored links, quote sponsored links, or sponsored stories. Sometimes they don't even have that much of a label. But the word sponsored does not give the reader, the user of the website, much idea that what they're reading is not news content, but a paid message, a message that is intended to market something, to persuade, rather than a news message intended to inform. The whole concept is based on deception. One of the leading advocates of native advertising is Forbes.com. Although this site maintains that it practices full disclosure, readers have to possess a lot of inside knowledge if they're going to discriminate between or distinguish between what is a paid ad and what is a news story. The only disclaimer is a phrase, quote, ad voice, AD, or brand voice rather, brand voice in the headline. And that means paid content, according to Forbes.com. Does it mean that to the readers? Well, you can decide for yourself. My view is that this subtle phrase may fool some readers some of the time, that they're thinking that a marketer's message is intended to sell something. It's really a news story intended to inform. What they do is erode credibility and take away our advantage over the news competitors. An article, though, last month in the New York Times explains why native advertising is so attractive right now. The marketer was quoted as saying that a display ad, which is an ad on the website that really looks like an ad, got a click-through response of only about 1/1000%. Native advertising, an ad that looks like news, can get a click-through right now of percentages in the double digits. but that is a short-sighted gain if credible journalism is savaged in the process. Next, I'd like to, I want to point these things out about native average. Look for sponsored links, fake news stories, purpose to sell rather than inform. But next, I'd like to discuss another mounting problem in the digital era, and that is increasing volumes of mistakes in the news. Nothing, of course, is more sacred to journalists than getting it right. Accuracy is our byword. And getting it right is an ethical issue. People depend on us for information. If we get it wrong, they're cheated. And of course, if you're the subject of the story that is wrong in a derogatory way, you are seriously harmed because of sloppy journalism. Today, we have to be more vigilant about verification than ever. The main reason is the nature of the web. It's built for speed, and that invites taking shortcuts, particularly in verifying the information that you got. And that increases the likelihood of error. You take a chance skimping on verification often enough, and sooner or later you will get something wrong, and it could be something very important. We journalists, though, have always been competitive. We want to be first with the news. But in the pre-digital age, we had more time. The newspapers had just 2 or 3 deadlines a day, and broadcasters had just a few scheduled broadcasts. Only the wire services back then had a deadline every minute, and they did that because somewhere in the world, one of their client newspapers may be going to press and will need that story. Even in those days, though, the International News Service, one of the wire services, came up with a slogan that urged restraint. Get it first, but first, get it right. In an era where everybody has a deadline every minute, then these are words to remember. Add to this the expectation that reporters deliver the news several times a day on multiple platforms, and that in the current economic climate, fewer reporters are often required to do more. These factors also increase the chance of error. Recently, there have been some high-profile errors in breaking news. We're talking about Congressman Gabrielle Giffords being reported dead rather than wounded in the aftermath of the shooting at Tucson. We're talking about the misidentification of the shooter at Sandy Hook Elementary School. We're talking about an early arrest having been made in the Boston Marathon bombings, and about an AR-15 rifle having been used in the Washington Navy Yard shootings, just to name a few. Now, I empathize with the reporters struggling to cover those events under deadline pressure. But like any editor and any professor, I have to ask you, what can we learn from those mistakes? One mistake is to be wary of sources, that there's always confusion at the outset of such an event. And the police can be confused just as we are. They're human too. So we need to ask them, as we ask each other, or should ask each other, how do you know that? Tell us where you got that information. And that goes for other sources of news as well. We want to know firsthand information, not people who are reporting hearsay to us. In the Gabrielle Giffords case, NPR had 2 sources that she was dead, but both sources, it turned out, were quoting other sources who didn't have firsthand information either. So we have to ask that question. How do we know it? In his media column in USA Today, the columnist Rim Ryder cautioned against running any information the reporter hears on the police scanner. Now, listening to the scanner is important. You know that's an important tool in police reporting. But what you hear has to be treated as a lead, not as a finished story. You've got to get it confirmed. And we all, when we cover breaking news, remember what Dan Rather said on that day, 9/11. The early reports inevitably are wrong. Speaking of mistakes in reporting, I'd like to call your attention to an egregious error that Associated Press made in Virginia recently. AP ran a story saying the documents in a federal fraud case alleged that Terry McAuliffe lied to a federal agent. This is particularly important because Mr. McAuliffe is a Democratic candidate for governor in a hotly contested election that will culminate next Tuesday. Someone with the initials TM were alleged in the documents to have lied, but as AP acknowledged in a correction published 98 minutes later, the indictment did not identify McAuliffe as the TM in question. So what can we learn from this? I see two lessons. One is to check any tip, such as the one that the reporter got that TM is Terry McAuliffe. And second, more important probably, is not to run the story until you've contacted the subject of the story. In this case, the candidate or his organization. The AP's original story said McAuliffe, quote, did not immediately respond to email and phone requests for comments about the allegation. Such a damaging allegation would have to be held until you've contacted the subject. There's no reason to put that on the wire when they did. You've got to give the person a chance to explain. In this case, he would say, you better check your facts because I'm not the TM, which would have, of course, headed off the mistake in the first place. But that also means that the reporter has to hold the story even if another organization gets it first. Okay, the accuracy problem that I see is exacerbated by a vanishing cadre of editors. Sadly, much of what goes on the web has not been vetted. Now, as a longtime editor, I hasten to say that the process of editing does not mean intrinsically that an editor is smarter than the reporter, only that it's less likely that a mistake in fact or in judgment will get past two people instead of one. Over the last 2 decades, at the same time newspaper copy desks have been eviscerated, news websites were launched without being adequately staffed with editors. And these sites continue to be understaffed. Online editing has been the subject of a good deal of rationalizing. There's a temptation to think that because online, as opposed to print or broadcast, that you can correct something wrong very easily. So we can post a story first and correct it later. And the rationalization continues that if there's a mistake, the readers will promptly point it out to us. So maybe we don't need as many editors. And of course, this is an abdication of responsibility. It ignores the harm that occurs when a sloppy story is posted online, even for a few minutes. Right now, in newsrooms across the country, the standards for the future of journalism are being formulated. The template is being set. And often this is incremental decisions made by an editor on the scene, usually responding to shortage of staffing and shortage of financial resources. But collectively, all of these individual decisions become the template of what journalism could become. So we need to think about all that. Okay, and one more point about the digital era is the online comments. The internet empowers the audience to join the conversation about the news, and news organizations have an ethical duty to try to build the community forum and exchange ideas. And so what we should be looking for is an intellectual exchange. What we get, though, is the bullies of cyberspace using our website to spread their venom. And what should be that intellectual exchange becomes a sewer of lies and profanity and ad hominem attacks. This is not what we want. In newspaper letters to the editor, historically, writers are identified. They are not allowed to misstate the facts. They're not allowed to use foul language. They're not allowed to make personal assaults. Why should online comments be different? Again, business considerations have entered the picture. It costs money to hire editors, to monitor those comments. And some users are attracted to this kind of raucous content, which drives up traffic, which supposedly is good for advertisers. Now, I'm seeing some signs of improvement. More and more news organizations are handling anonymous comments, or they're banning anonymous comments, and they're requiring real names, not screen names. And that makes people accountable for what they put up. And the Center Daily Times here at State College joined this group of news organizations recently by announcing that they would would ban anonymous comments. Now, some websites use different techniques, such as coaxing wholesome comments by appealing to the ego of the commenters, that they get a star if it's a particularly good comment, and if other users click on a recommend, then those are tabulated so they are shown to be someone who said something that resonates with other users. Whatever the method, I think that we need to be looking deeply at how we can improve our online comments, because in the right vein, they can be an asset to journalism and to the community. And so I've given you my observations now of what I see going on, the state of journalism ethics in the digital age. Some of them are directly related to digital delivery, and others simply a consequence of the environment that the digital age has given us. And what I'd like to do now is join my colleague John Dillon and talk about some more questions, and then John will ask you for your questions. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to ask several questions just to get things started, and then certainly be looking to you to ask more questions and keep the discussion rolling. Gene, to start, let's talk about something that's in the news, and talk maybe about the ethical aspects of it. Edward Snowden's releases of classified information keeps coming out drip by drip. Most recently about U.S. spying on allies, something that people in the intelligence community say goes on all the time. But we look at SBJ code, we could say, look at the phrase that says minimize harm. So do we have an ethical issue going on there between news organizations and government?
I think that when we have government secrets, that we do have to balance minimize harm, namely protecting national security, versus our obligation to inform the public about things that they need to know about. And I think that the news media have a pretty good record on that. But that process has to continue, and it has to be a very scrupulous one. Snowden may not be someone who's a particularly attractive figure. I wouldn't want him working for me. But the fact is, we're having a debate now about how much of our civil rights we gave up in order to maintain our national security. Until Snowden, by way of my friend Greenwald, we got that information, we couldn't have had that debate. And I think it's a debate we need to be having. So a tremendous responsibility on the editors involved to make that decision and to weigh carefully. And to their credit, they have sought comment for the government before they've done something. They've listened to the arguments, and they've usually made redaction as what they were going to print based on carefully considering what the government said. So we have a great system of government here. The First Amendment gives us that freedom and also that responsibility to report on what the government does, including secrets.
Okay, good. Another question to shift here a little bit. We talked about responsibility to be fair and impartial, and then also talked about transparency in terms of opinion. Recently, in fact, it was last week, the Pew Research Center did a study of Facebook users and how they got news on Facebook. And one of the questions was, did they prefer to get news that had opinion in it? The response was about 31% of Facebook users who read news on Facebook thought that was fine, which would indicate that most did not. And a few also noted that paralleled pretty well with the 27% of the U.S. public who felt the same way. The opinion was fine with them. Again, we have a good majority, apparently saying they want their news straight up. Yet, somehow it's taken hold that on the internet, opinion in news is a good thing, and I think perhaps people are accepting that maybe without questioning.
Well, I agree with you that the good news in that survey is not that about 30% of the people want to see their own views reflected in the news report, but that 70% want to have it straight. In 40 years of listening to readers complain about perceived bias in our news columns, and I know as a managing editor you've heard the same thing, is that one thing that they kept telling me over and over again: if you want to express opinions, put it on your editorial page, but keep it out of the news columns. They understood that the news columns should be bias-free. And I think that's another answer to Glenn Greenwald, is that majority of the people don't want those opinions in their news columns. They can turn to the editorial page, or they can turn on Fox or MSNBC. But I do lament the fact that as many as 30% want the news served to them with a bias. But I'm hoping that we can reach some of those folks too. I don't think we have any choice but to keep on keeping on, trying to be accurate and fair and impartial point of view.
Okay, let's go to questions from the students. Yes. Sure.
Hi. Do you think that the need for an increase in revenue both in broadcast and in print journalism has compromised the quality of news?
Okay, question again for those who didn't hear. Does Gene think the need for revenue in print and broadcast has compromised quality?
Yeah. Well, it certainly threatens to be that. And if I mentioned some things that our ad colleagues are doing that call into question the credibility of what report. If they run fake news stories, and people, in due time, they're smart people. The readers figure it out. They've been fooled that this is not a news story written by one of us journalists trying to give them information, but rather by a marketer trying to influence them to buy something. They go somewhere else for their news, so that does hurt us. But I think that any time that we are short of money, it puts more and more pressure on us to not hold up the ethical principles. I think that that there's always that pressure, and I think it's admirable that journalists by and large have stood up to that kind of pressure. But the more pressure, the more likelihood is that ethical standards will be eroded.
Okay, other questions? Yes.
Hi.
This is kind of bouncing a little bit around like that same question, but in a different way. So recently I read an article in Ad Age, which is like a source for like news and marketing, marketing-related news. And I read an article that says that Meredith Copeland-Levin, the executive vice president of advertising for the New York Times, said that they're planning to introduce branded content into the newspaper's website and redesign, scheduled to roll out in 2014. So my question is, I mean, before that, like, native advertising could, it could erode the credibility of like big newspapers that we know or have come to know of today that we find credible. But what if there is a slight possibility that we could be wrong about like how branded content, which is also native advertising, would revolutionize the industry? Now, if it was done wrong, then it could potentially be detrimental. But if someone like the New York Times does it right, say they have a marketplace for this content, which is completely separated from the editorial side, would that change your opinion about it?
Okay, so as a summarize, an Ad Age article quoting the ad director of the New York Times is saying branded content would be coming to the new rollout of the Times website. That would indicate maybe a stamp of potential approval or maybe at least of quality. And Ebony's question, what if we're wrong? What if branded content does turn out?
Branded content, what if it,
If it turns out that branded content becomes an accepted form of revenue and form of information.
yeah, I mean, that's the great danger, is that is Ed Wasserman, who is I think is a respected critic on journalism ethics, wrote a column recently about native advertising. His closing paragraph said that it may not be what we want, but it may be what we will get. The absence of our ability to raise revenue in the normal ways that we provide content that attracts readers and then they become an audience that the advertisers can reach by advertising is not working well on the web for a variety of reasons. And so that leads them, the entrepreneurs on the ad side, to trying to figure out a way that they can make it work. And right now, native advertising ads that are fake news stories are very attractive to them because it's bringing in revenue. The click-through rate that I mentioned in my comments is a very real statistic that is influencing a lot of people. So some very intelligent people are saying this is the way we ought to go. And I feel strongly the other way, and because I do feel that in long term we will kill the golden goose that by being greedy and running running ads that look like news.
Okay, next question.
Okay, we're here.
You said that standards for ethics can change over time as long as it's a trial and error process. But in an industry with fewer and fewer editors at every level, how do you suggest they facilitate that change without just letting reporters run wild and see how bad things can go before it's too bad?
Okay, so the question, I don't know if I got this right, with so few editors, what's the control or lack of control on reporters, and a few editors are there just sort of rolling with it to see where the low point is before there might be a turnaround ethically. Did I capture the question? Okay.
Yeah, I hope I mentioned some egregious examples of mistakes in reporting and mistakes then subsequently in editing. We may be seeing it right now. I don't know. I just think that as the number of reporters available, particularly in print, has declined, that copy desks have been eviscerated in order to provide more, that what staffing remains, the editors tend to put it in the field reporting. Their logic is the copy editors don't bring in any news in. They're simply processing what the reporters have done. Therefore, that's a good place to cut. And I would agree with you. The point will be reached, if not already, where we say we really need to have more editors. And I hope that point, I don't hope nothing really bad happens that forces that, but I hope people will come to that realization that an investment in a strong editing staff is extremely important to a website as well as a print newspaper.
Okay, another question?
I often keep seeing disclaimers on social media websites, Facebook, Twitter, all that, saying all views expressed from reporters. All views expressed are my own, not my company's, not my newspapers, blah, blah, blah. Do you think that's a legitimate way?
Nobody believes that. It's gonna be, but I want to answer, I'm sorry for interrupting, but you can say that, but we're talking about human nature, and John and I, as managing editors, have listened to human nature, people beating us over the head with complaints for years and years. And so, my assessment is that if they see a reporter whose byline they recognize saying something on a Facebook or a web that doesn't agree with their look, they're not going to trust that reporter again. And no matter what you say, that this is just my own opinion. Even that is bad enough because they often report these stories. But what I would worry about as a managing editor is that is that viewpoint is attributed to the organization as a whole, even though they issue a disclaimer.
Okay, another question?
Gene, in the Virginia case that you had mentioned, the Associated Press made the decision to fire the reporter
Yeah.
and the two editors who handled that story, in which the error surfaced and was corrected in about an hour and a half.
Yeah.
As someone who for decades was a supervisor editor in a newsroom, made these kinds of decisions, the circumstances in that case, do you think firing was appropriate?
I talked with John, who's from AP, I just read about this today, and this is not a management forum, but we were talking about the idea of getting it right. It's certainly an egregious error, and I guess that I would probably come down as Rim Ryder did in his column, saying it went too far. But John gave me some background on this today. John, would you mind if I call on you? John Affleck, Knight Professor.
One thing to know about the Associated Press situation in particular is that it comes in the context of the AP made a mistake on saying there was an early arrest in the Boston Marathon bombing. The AP did some things right early on in the marathon story, but that was a big thing to get wrong. And even after it was pretty clear that the wire was wrong, management essentially decided to sort of double down on that situation and thought that maybe they weren't wrong, or we're just holding out hope. So in the wake of the Boston Marathon bombing, there was a big internal sort of navel gazing is the phrase that's coming to mind, about standards and how do we know what we know, and those sorts of issues. So to have a mistake that was that egregious, that could have easily been solved, as Gene said, by simply waiting to confirm a fact, probably seemed that much more egregious in the context of a time when people were saying you really have to, accuracy is one of our core values.
Thanks. Juliet, and then Zach.
Kind of going off that, as far as accuracy in breaking news, do you think it would be acceptable to say that maybe, we believe the reports are saying that there has been an arrest made, but this is not confirmed, this is still an ongoing investigation thing? Do you think that is an acceptable way around the whole accuracy in breaking news?
So Juliet's question was, I think you're referring to the Boston case, or any case in which you've got a statement about what would have occurred, an arrest was made, for example, and then follow that by saying, but that's not been confirmed. Is that acceptable enough, or is that just sort of weaseling around the fact that you want to try to get it out that there was an arrest made?
Yeah, I think it's weaseling. That we're in the business of reporting facts and not rumors. One of the things I've always talked in 409 classes with the ethics students is you almost say never about a certain practice in journalism. But that's a pretty, not running rumors is pretty high on our list. That journalists listen to rumors, that's part of what we do. Then if we think it's news, if true, the important part being if true, then we check it out. And if it's not true, we don't publish. If it is true, we got a story. But that is a big dividing line. And I think that we need to not report rumors, and just simply saying it's unconfirmed is trying to have your cake and eat it too.
Okay, Zach?
Piggybacking off of that, you mentioned all the blunders in a lot of the breaking news stories recently. For example, with the Sandy Hook shooting, I know that a lot of people on Facebook identified the brother of the actual suspect, and news organizations were reporting that that was the suspect because that's what they had seen on Facebook. Where do you draw the line ethically of confirming that something is real from people you don't know on the internet?
Okay, the question is, where do you draw the line in confirming whether or not something is true
Yeah, I think that the news organizations, including the AP, has issued advisories to its member papers that this is being reported on Facebook. We cannot confirm it, or they think that we've proved it not true, and explain that. Now, that doesn't go to the reading audience itself, but I think we continue to adhere to the principle that that rumors may be news if true, but if we can't prove they're true, they're not news.
Okay, next question. Yes.
In my journalism ethics class, we watched the clip of Penn State reporting down in Haiti after the earthquake. And he came from behind the camera to assist a young boy that had been injured, was a head injury. I was just wondering, with that in scope, what is the thin line, if any, that should be walked? Well, could you speak to the line that needs to be walked between activism and people coming from behind the camera, so to say, and actual journalism as we are supposed to be observers?
Okay, the question is, Gene, speak to the issue of activism, or maybe at least empathy, versus reporting in a particular situation. Your example was when Anderson Cooper, reporting in Haiti, stepped away from the camera to assist a child or somebody who's nearby. Basically doing something, stepping out of a reporter's role.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's television. I'm not an expert on television, but it seems to me that that's drawing attention to the individual, that reporters in a situation, say like Katrina or the earthquake in Haiti, have performed acts of kindness as they went about their duties. If they devote full time to being a relief worker, they're not giving us, the public, the information that their editors sent them down to do. It's possible for journalists deployed in a disaster area like that to spend all their time doing that. And so you have to make a decision that it may sound callous, but anytime you spend away from your reporting jobs is less information that gets out to the public about that they are needing to know. So there has to be some sort of a happy medium there in trying to divide what is our responsibility as human beings as responsibility for journalists. And in my book, there is a chapter on that, relating how different reporters have tried to deal with that question. It's not an easy one. It's easier if a person just sat down and is saying, help people in a disaster relief mode all the time, but that would not be doing their job. And that's important too.
Okay, we have time for maybe one or two more questions.
Over here. Oh, over here. Okay.
Who raised their hand? Who raised their hand? Gene, I have another question for you then.
Okay.
Take your case in. Goes up the issue of rumors on the internet, where beyond the occasional rumor being reported, we now have a number of very popular internet organizations, Gawker, BuzzFeed being two of them, that essentially built their reputations on fairly loose ethical standards, including firing the trigger fairly quickly on pretty much any kind of rumor. They are now going beyond that way of doing things, or to expand, to hire journalists to do real news. At the same time, they're hanging on to their niche of the rumor reporting and the celebrity reporting, all the rest of that.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that's going to play with readers? Is it going to cause confusion? Where is the ethical line that could be drawn within BuzzFeed or Gawker about how they do their journalism?
Well, the BuzzFeed and Gawker will edit their websites, and if I'm editing my paper or website, I'd say that I would maybe have different standards. But I recognize the appeal of that. And Kelly McBride from Poynter Institute, and I mentioned her a while ago, and I think she's an outstanding thinker, commented about when she was actually serving as an ombudsman for ESPN, which has Rumors Central and that sort of thing. And she analyzed that and said a lot of what they call rumors is actually analysis and a lot of it has been checked out and reported. They're actually story. But there is some that is just flat rumors. And it gets an audience. People want to know what gossip is. But I think that news organizations ought to stand for accuracy and verified, confirmed facts. If we stick to that, I think that we're going in the right direction. And in the long term, will be more useful and valuable to our audience than if we engaged in rumors. Someone told me several years ago about how the Inquirer, this was after I'd left the Inquirer, but said that the Inquirer reported something about some recruit was coming to Penn State. And if they had been listening or reading one of the websites that dealt with Penn State football, they would have read that a long time ago. And I asked them, well, would they have also read a lot of things that didn't really happen? And they said, well, yeah. And I think that's the test, is that we want to establish a reputation that if we report it, you can book it, you can count on us. And if we get into the rumor business, it's a slippery slope, and I don't like where we might be headed. So I would say stick to our guns, verify, and then report. If it's just rumors that we can't check out, we don't report. As somebody said, just because it is out there, which is often an argument made why we should have it, doesn't mean it's in here. So let's stick to our guns.
Okay, I think we can't end on a stronger note than that. So,
Okay.
Gene, thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Very well.
Thank you for your